Whmis in Canada is undergoing change with the introduction of Whmis 2015. Whmis 2015 will align Canada with the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, known as the GHS. GHS is a worldwide system. Its goal is to have a common set of rules for classifying hazardous products, common rules for labels, and a standard format for safety data sheets that is adopted around the world. The transition of Whmis 1988 to align Canada with the GHS has resulted in Whmis 2015. Manufacturers, suppliers, employers, and workers are undergoing Whmis 2015 implementation that will take place over several years. Both Whmis 1988 and Whmis 2015 may be used in the workplace during transition period until full implementation by December 1st, 2018. During this transition period, as a supplier of chemical products, Torbram Electric Supply will be supplying products covered by both Whmis 1988 and Whmis 2015, and therefore both Whmis 1988 and Whmis 2015 training is required during this transition period. The next part of your orientation will cover the Whmis 2015 training requirements. As with Whmis 1988, there are 3 ways hazardous materials can result in injury or illness to employees. They are through fire or explosion, physical contact, or by entering the body. Let's take a look at each one of these in more detail. Fire or explosion are injuries related to burns and trauma from fires or explosions. Physical contact to the skin, face, or eyes with any solid, liquid, or gas can result in burns, dermatitis, tissue damage, and allergic reactions. These can be prevented through the implementation of engineering controls, procedures, training, and use of appropriate personal protective equipment. Hazardous materials can enter the body by absorption, injection, ingestion, and inhalation. We call these the routes of entry. Let's take a closer look at how hazardous materials may enter the body and cause illness. Inhalation or breathing is the most common. Materials in the form of dusts, mists, sprays, smokes, fumes, vapors, and gases can be breathed in through your nose and mouth and into your lungs, then absorbed into your bloodstream. Once in your bloodstream, they can travel to all your body organs. Ingestion or swallowing. Materials can enter your digestive system by eating or smoking if the material is on your hands. They are then absorbed into your bloodstream through your stomach and intestines. Absorption. Materials can enter the body by passing through your skin and enter the bloodstream. Injection. Materials can enter the body into the bloodstream through cuts by needle sticks. Through the use of adequate ventilation, procedures, training, and the use of appropriate protective respiratory equipment, we can prevent hazardous materials from entering the body. Hazard classifications and symbols. Whmis 2015 has a classification system for hazardous materials along with a set of distinctive hazard symbols. Based on their properties, hazardous materials are assigned to specific hazard groups, classes, and categories which are identified by hazard symbols. These are the hazard symbols under Whmis 2015: flammable, oxidizing, compressed gas, explosive, corrosive, harmful/irritant, toxic, health hazard, biohazardous infectious material, dangerous for the environment. We will now review how the hazard symbols and the classification system work together. The Whmis 2015 Hazard Classification System is made up of groups, classes, and categories. There are two hazard groups, physical and health. Each group is then made up of a number of hazard classes and categories. The hazard symbols are used to help identify the classes of specific hazards. First, let's take a look at the hazard classes and symbols under the physical hazard group. The physical hazard group includes the following classes: flammable gases, flammable aerosols, oxidizing gases, gases under pressure, flammable liquids, flammable solids, self-reactive substances and mixtures, pyrophoric liquids, and pyrophoric solids. Some examples of these include substances that are self-heating substances and mixtures which, in contact with water, emit flammable gases, oxidizing liquids and solids, organic peroxides, corrosive to metals, combustible dusts, simple asphyxiants, pyrophoric gases, and physical hazards not otherwise classified. Let's take a look at each of the physical hazard classes and their related hazard symbols. The explosive material symbol is used for the self-reactive substances and mixtures and organic peroxides physical hazard class. These include unstable materials that can cause or increase the intensity of a fire. Many organic peroxides are unstable and may be highly reactive or explosive. Precautionary statements may include requires specific storage and handling procedures for these substances, and an example includes dynamite. The flammable symbol is used for the physical hazard classes, which include gases, aerosols, liquids or solids that are self-reactive substances and mixtures, pyrophoric liquids, solids, and gases, and organic peroxides, self-heating substances and mixtures. These can include substances and mixtures which, in contact with water, emit flammable gases, substances that will burn if ignited by a spark, static discharge, or a hot surface. Precautionary statements may include avoiding ignition sources such as sparks, smoking, flames, and hot surfaces. Ground and bond containers properly when pouring liquids so that there are no electric sparks. Wearing proper personal protective equipment. Store flammable raw materials in flammable storage rooms or flammable storage cabinets. Examples include propane, alcohol, gasoline, acetone, and toluene. The oxidizing symbol is used for the physical hazard class, which includes oxidizing materials in the form of gases, liquids, and solids. These can include hazardous materials that may pose a fire or explosion risk if they come in contact with material that can burn even without an ignition source. Materials that increase the intensity of a fire and do not usually burn by themselves. Precautionary statements may include keep these materials away from combustible materials. Store these materials in a designated area, such as an oxidizers-only storage area. Keep these materials away from heat, hot surfaces, sparks, or open flames. Wear proper personal protective equipment. Examples include chlorine tablets, nitric acid, if spilled on cotton fabric, can cause it to ignite and burn when the spill acid dries. The compressed gas symbol is used for the physical hazard class, which includes compressed gas. These can include containers that are under pressure and may explode if heated or dropped, or may rocket if ruptured. Containers with leaking gas that can be very cold and may cause frostbite if touches your skin, such as propane. Precautionary statements may include: move cylinders using a carrier designed for that purpose. Ensure cylinder caps are in place. Store all cylinders in a cool, dry, well-ventilated place. Ensure cylinders are always secured properly to prevent tipping. Examples include fire extinguishers, welding gases, propane, and aerosol sprays. The corrosive symbol is used for the physical hazard class, which includes corrosive material. These can include hazardous materials that cause corrosion to metals, hazardous materials that can cause severe skin burns or irritation and eye damage. Precautionary statements may include: keep containers tightly closed, wear proper personal protective equipment to avoid contact with eyes and skin, work in well-ventilated areas, and examples include hydrochloric acid and nitric acid. These physical hazards do not have a specific symbol. Combustible dusts, a mixture or substance that, in the form of finely divided solid particles, which, upon ignition, are liable to catch fire or explode when dispensed in air. Simple asphyxiants, gases that may displace oxygen in air and cause rapid suffocation. Physical hazards not otherwise classified, hazards that occur by chemical reaction and result in serious injury or death at the time the reaction occurs. The second group of hazards under Whmis 2015 is the health hazard group, and this group includes the following hazard classes: acute toxicity, skin corrosion irritation, serious eye damage, eye irritation, respiratory or skin sensitization, germ cell mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicity, specific target organ toxicity single exposure, specific target organ toxicity repeated exposure, aspiration hazard, biohazardous infectious materials, health hazards not otherwise classified. Let's take a closer look at the health hazard class and the related hazard symbols. The skull and crossbone symbol is used for the health hazard class, which includes acute toxicity. These can include toxic substances that may cause severe health effects or even death if you breathe them in, if they come in contact with your skin, or if swallowed. Also includes materials that are highly poisonous, and hazard statements in this class will warn you if the product is fatal, toxic, or harmful. Acute toxicity inhalation categories 1 and 2 will include the signal word danger and the hazard statement fatal if inhaled. Acute toxicity inhalation category 3 will include the signal word danger and the hazard statement toxic if inhaled. Acute toxicity inhalation category 4 will include the signal word warning and the hazard statement harmful if inhaled, and it will also use the exclamation mark symbol. Precautionary statements may include avoid direct contact, use general and local exhaust ventilation, wear proper personal protective equipment, store these materials in a secure designated area, and an example includes cyanide. The health hazard symbol is used for the health hazard classes which include carcinogenicity, germ cell mutagenicity, respiratory sensitization and aspiration hazard, reproductive toxicity, specific target organ toxicity from repeated exposure, specific target toxicity from single exposure, category 1 and 2. Precautionary statements may include keeping containers tightly closed, wearing proper personal protective equipment to avoid contact with eyes and skin, working in a well-ventilated area. Examples include asbestos, lead, and benzene. The harmful/irritant hazard symbol is used for the health hazard classes which include acute toxicity category 4, skin corrosion irritation category 2, serious eye damage eye irritation category 2, respiratory or skin sensitization category 1, specific target organ toxicity single exposure category 3. Precautionary statements may include keeping containers tightly closed, wearing proper personal protective equipment to avoid contact with eyes and skin, working in well-ventilated areas. And examples include methylcrylate, which causes skin sensitization. The biohazard symbol is used for the biohazardous infectious materials class. These can include biological organisms or toxins that may cause serious infectious disease or death in humans and animals. Precautionary statements may include that you take every precaution to avoid contamination, handling of these materials using all the personal protective equipment recommended on the safety data sheet, handling these materials only in designated areas. Examples are mainly found in hospitals and patient care facilities. First aiders may be exposed if in contact with body fluids such as blood. Note that the biohazardous infectious materials hazard class was included in Whmis 1988, but is not part of the GHS. This class has been retained in Whmis 2015 to maintain worker protection. An environmental hazards group exists in GHS. This group and its classes was not adopted in Whmis 2015. However, you may see the environmental classes listed on labels and SDSs, including information about environmental hazards is allowed under Whmis 2015. Hazard categories. We have seen that a number of hazard classes use category numbers. The category identifies the degree of hazard. Category 1 is always more hazardous than Category 2 or 3. The lower the number, the higher the hazard category. Here we can see the alignment of the hazard symbols and hazard classes we have just reviewed. The next important component of Whmis 2015 is the warning labels. Labels are important as they alert you that a product is potentially hazardous and provide information about the major hazards of the product and the basic steps that should be taken in order to use the product safely. All containers covered under Whmis 2015 must be labeled with the appropriate label. Container labels must be removed if the container will be reused for non-hazardous materials. There are three types of labels: supplier labels, workplace labels, and other labels or identifiers. Let's take a look at each of these types of labels. Manufacturers and suppliers of hazardous products covered under Whmis 2015 are required to ensure their products are labeled with a supplier label. These are the Whmis 2015 requirements for the supplier label. There are 6 required components for a supplier label: the product identifier, which is the product name exactly as it appears on the container and on the SDS; the hazard symbol or pictogram, which is the hazard symbols determined by the hazard classification of the product. In some cases, no symbol is required. Signal words. Danger or warning are used to emphasize hazards and indicate the severity of the hazard. Danger is used for the more severe hazards, and warning is used for the less severe hazards. Only one signal word will appear on the label. Some of the low hazard categories do not have a signal word assigned. Hazard statements. Brief standardized statements of all the hazards based on the hazard classification of the product. Example of a hazard statement includes extremely flammable gas, fatal if inhaled, causes eye irritation, may cause cancer. Precautionary statements. These statements describe recommended measures to minimize or prevent adverse effects from exposure to the product, including protective equipment and emergency measures. Some examples of precautionary statements include wear protective gloves or protective clothing, eye protection, or face protection. Keep container tightly closed. Fight fire remotely due to the risk of explosion. And precautionary statements on the label may not identify all the control measures that may be required. The safety data sheet should be reviewed for more information. Supplier identifier. The company which made, packaged, sold, or imported the product and is responsible for the label and the safety data sheet. Here is another look at the 6 requirements of a supplier label. The product identifier is product ABC. The skull and crossbones symbol indicates a health hazard, and the exclamation mark symbol indicates another health hazard, which in this case is skin irritation. The signal word is danger. The hazard statements are fatal if swallowed and causes skin irritation. This label also indicates precautionary statements and the supplier label. Note that the label must be in both English and French. For your health and safety, you should ensure the container is labeled. Read the label and ensure you understand and follow the instructions. Follow your workplace-specific safe work procedures. Request a new label if the original label is not legible. If you transfer the chemical to a new container, make sure a workplace label is placed on it. In the event a supplier label is missing, damaged, or accidentally removed from a container, then an employer must ensure that a workplace label is applied to the product. A workplace label is also required if a product is decanted from an original container to other containers which do not have a supplier label. There are 3 required components for a workplace label: the product identifier, which is the product name exactly as it appears on the container and on the safety data sheet. Hazard symbol is optional. hazard symbols determined by the hazard classification of the product. Precautionary statements. These statements describe recommended measures to minimize or prevent adverse effects from exposure to the product, including protective equipment and emergency measures. And a reference to the safety data sheet. Other labels or identifiers. These types of labels are used on large containers and piping systems that contain hazardous materials. We will now take a look at the Safety Data Sheet, SDS, formerly known as the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, under Whmis 1988. The SDS is designed to assist an employee in answering 4 basic questions. What is the identity of the material and who is the supplier? What are the hazards in working with this material? What precautions should be taken to work safely with the material? And what to do in an emergency? Whmis 2015 Safety Data Sheets will contain 16 sections. 1. Identification. 2. Hazard identification. 3. Composition information on ingredients. 4. First aid measures. 5. Firefighting measures. 6. Accidental release measures. 7. Handling and storage. 8. Exposure controls, personal protection. 9. Physical and chemical properties. 10. Stability and reactivity. 11. Toxicological information. 12. Ecological information. 13. Disposal considerations. 14. Transport information. 15. Regulatory information. And 16. Other information. Sections 12, 13, 14, and 15 require the headings to be present, but under Whmis 2015, the supplier has the option to not provide information in these sections. Let's take a closer look at each section. Section 1, Identification, includes specific identification information related to the product, including the date the safety data sheet was created. Section 2, Hazard Identification, will include information related to the hazard, classification, category, symbol, signal word, and hazard statements that would be listed on the supplier label. Section 2 also includes all the detailed precautionary statements for the product. You may see statements related to prevention and response. Also in Section 2, storage and disposal information is found. Section 3 will list the ingredients of the product and concentration percentages. Section 4 is very important as it will include all the first aid measures. Section 5 will cover the appropriate firefighting measures. Section 6 covers the emergency measures to be taken in the event of an accidental release. Section 7 will detail the handling and storage requirements for the product. Section 8 will list the product's ingredients and the allowable exposure limits along with the personal protective equipment requirements when using the product. Section 9 contains the physical and chemical properties of the product. Section 10 notes the stability and reactivity of the product under specific conditions. Section 11 will provide the toxicological information for the likely routes of exposure and acute toxicity of each ingredient in the product. Section 11 also provides any information related to the carcinogenicity of the product. You can see that depending on the product, there may be extensive toxicological information in Section 11. Sections 12 and 13 provide ecological information and disposal considerations for the product. Section 14 will provide the required transport information and reference to transportation of dangerous goods information if applicable. Section 15 will list any regulatory information related to the product. And finally, Section 16, Other Information, includes administrative information related to the creation of the SDS and contacts. As you can see, the SDS is full of helpful information related to the safe use, handling, and disposal of hazardous products. Employers are required to keep an inventory of all the hazardous products, SDSs, and make them readily available to all employees who may be affected by the hazardous product. The SDS should be used to carry out the job-specific training for employees by reviewing the key components of each SDS for the products that they will be using in the workplace. The key objectives of Whmis 2015 is to prevent injury or illness when working with hazardous materials. These 4 preventative measures should be part of your organization's Whmis program. They include engineering controls, the design of controls and equipment to remove hazards, for example, ventilation, guarding, designated storage areas, and sound isolation. Work practices, developing procedures and processes to reduce hazards, for example, preventative maintenance, confined space entry procedures, and material handling procedures. Hygiene practices. Good hygiene practices reduce the chance of exposure to hazards. For example, washing your hands often, not eating in work areas, and the separation of work clothes from street clothes. Personal protective equipment. The use of personal protective equipment as a preventative measure should be a last resort or used in combination with any of the other protective measures already discussed. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, includes the use of such items as safety glasses, goggles, face shields, hard hats, gloves, earplugs, safety shoes, and aprons.